Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 91 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, hello. And we are back here to discuss some Nebraska football with you, as well as some broader things within the Big Ten rule set during this strange pandemic times that we're in, and some of the recruiting stuff that's happened over the summer for Nebraska. So we'll get all that to you today.
And that sounds like a good subject.
Yeah. And for those of you who may be new to the podcast, you'd be interested to hear that this is a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. And we're here, a father-son duo, talking from across the country to discuss our favorite team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, as well as what's going on in the more national side of college football. And we're all coming to you safely from our homes, whether that's in LA or in an RV, staying safe from COVID and all that. So we'll get right into it. The first thing I have written down here is some news, that's quite old now, but since we weren't doing podcasts over the summer, we did have some key players leave the team for various reasons, including J.D. Spielman and Noah Vedral. I know in the case of Vedral, it's mostly because we have some young talent beneath him that, will assuredly become like our quarterback in the future. But I think he played, well enough in the games that he was in last year. So I was a little bit surprised to see that.
Well, yes. He was, what would I say? He was recognizing that his potential to be a starter at Nebraska had diminished a bit, right? Because we're speaking of Vedral here, right?
Right.
Or are you talking about JD? Okay, Vedral, yeah. So he realized that in all likelihood, in the eyes of the coaches, he was now on the edge of probably shifting down to third on the depth chart behind McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. And so, he was kind of seeing the writing on the wall that he had 2 years of eligibility left. And if he wanted to compete, he had come home from Central Florida to play at Nebraska with the hopes that he could contribute and be a factor. And he had done that and been a part of 2 years at Nebraska. And now he had the opportunity, I think, to transfer somewhere and be immediately eligible and be able to see playing time somewhere. So his priority was, at that point, was playing time. So that was the deal.
Right. And then with that, that's kind of the story I had concocted in terms of Vedral. For Spielman, I'm a little bit more in the dark, I have to admit.
Right. Well, Spielman, his issues go back to last year after the season ended. Obviously, the season did not go well for Nebraska last year. There was some indications that he was not seeing eye to eye with the coaching staff and their vision for how he fit into the program. I think they always had hoped that JD would grow into more of a leadership role because he was now one of the older players, more experienced players, certainly one of the most recognized players in terms of, being all Big Ten freshman team. And then, going on from there and having lots of success and productivity. He very well would have graduated from Nebraska as the all-time leading receiver in the history of Nebraska football if he had stayed for his senior year. That's what likely would have happened unless he got injured right away or something. But he was struggling with some mental issues of his own, where he was having trouble with his own motivation, with his own attitude, and he did not want to be a leader. He's a quiet kid, and he just didn't want it. And I think he just didn't feel the connection with this new staff. And so he decided to quit school altogether last semester in the spring. Mm-hmm. And then COVID was a part of that too, or the lead up to COVID. And so, he left school and then didn't come back. And so there was speculation for quite a while about what he was going to do. He eventually decided, nope, I'm not going to come back to Nebraska. And he now landed at TCU.
Right.
So So he just was, his time with the Nebraska football team was over, right, in his mind. I don't think he was forced out by our coaches. I think he chose that on his own. And I don't have any more explanation than that.
Right. Well, and that definitely does hurt because he's one of our best receivers. But of course, now with this COVID situation and playing the 8 games and all that, all the teams are going to be messed up, in one way or the other. So everyone's just going to have to kind of adapt. But to your point, there's the normal kind of attrition, that you incur over the course of football season in terms of injuries and players just leaving for playing time elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera. But now you have the COVID stuff on top of that, so it's gonna be an interesting situation for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and so we lost those two. Now, in addition, you may not be as aware, but we've lost a number of other players, including 2 or 3 players from our freshman class that never even got to practice much. Right? Actually, I think one of them came at semester, so he had graduated high school early, a semester early, and then COVID happened. Just a month and a half into his tenure at Nebraska, and then he left before spring practice even uh, began because COVID happened, and then they canceled school and went online, and so they went back home to Florida. These kids were all from Florida, and they decided not to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So fall approached, and they were like, "Nope, I don't want to be at Nebraska anymore." And so they put themselves in the portal, and away they went. So we've had 3 players from our 2020 recruiting class already leave the team,
Right.
and they never even gave themselves a shot.
Right.
And I don't know that we're done. I think the decision to not have a, a a football season also led a couple of guys to reconsider. They sure as heck weren't wanting to sit around and twiddle their thumbs for a whole year waiting for the next fall to occur in 2021 in Nebraska when they couldn't play football. They were already struggling with the adjustment to Lincoln from the warmth and the big city ambiance of South Florida, and so they bugged out, and that's some of the negatives psychologically that happen as a result of this COVID's impact on college athletes.
Right. Yeah. And it's from it depends on the each family's individual situation, but I could totally understand, with this unprecedented event happening, you wanting to be closer to your family, especially since you're going to be learning online anyways. So why not be at home, and why not, choose a school that's closer to home or, there could be all sorts of reasons why they chose to do that. Of course, having your education paid for by the University of Nebraska is a pretty nice thing that you're letting go there. Um,
Right, exactly.
but once again, that's a story. I'm sure there are plenty of stories of that across teams across the nation. That's not a going to be an exclusive to Nebraska kind of thing.
Well, except that with Nebraska, our culture is different enough, right? And the real magnet, the thing that appeals or draws athletes to Nebraska is number one. The passion of the Nebraska fan base is always something it becomes immediately obvious to any player who is interested in Nebraska as one of their possible destinations. You see that in every way that it exhibits itself. But then, in addition, the way that Nebraska treats its student athletes. I mean, Nebraska has prided itself for years in being way ahead of the curve in how it goes about the athlete's experience, right? The educational side, the emotional side, the psychological side, and the athletic side all got more resources and get more attention, and their willingness to support the student athlete's success in all facets of their life, even beyond college, are second to none. And so players get to see that. But those are the kinds of things that an 18-year-old typically doesn't have high on their list yet. Mom and dad do, but Johnny doesn't. Does that make sense?
Right.
so so then it becomes an issue where when we don't get to demonstrate that, or when players don't get to experience the other parts, then it's very easy for them to walk away from Nebraska because there isn't the beautiful water, the physical beauty of LA, the Pacific Ocean, beaches, blah blah blah. South Miami, that sort of thing, or the prestige of academics at a place like Notre Dame or Stanford or even the University of Michigan, which prides itself on that academic standing. Nebraska doesn't have those things.
Yep.
So that's where it hits Nebraska harder.
Right. That's true. That's true. And you mentioned, those kids within our 2020 class who kind of moved on, but I know that obviously the whole COVID situation has also affected the recruiting in terms of the 2021 class as well. So maybe you could go into that a little bit.
It has. I mean, it's obviously motivated some players, I think, to make their decision a little earlier. Many kids though who aren't really sure yet have really had to struggle because they keep pushing out the dead period. So they keep extending the dead period because they don't want on-campus visits to happen, right? Because they don't want to encourage these young students, high school age kids, to go to colleges and interact and all that stuff during a period when COVID is still a major concern. So as a result, they have kept extending this dead period further and further out. And now it's officially, I think, extended to basically towards the end of the year, like December 18th or something. So kids are not going to be able to do the normal visits that they would do. That's part of the fun of the recruiting process. So if you're a recruit for the 2021 season and you didn't take any visits before, your junior year, before your senior year began, basically before COVID started, right? You don't get to go on those visits. And that's kind of screwed with people and it delayed their time frame of their decision. But at the same time, they're recognizing that schools all over the country are canceling programs, cutting back scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're athletes in the non-revenue sports, you're really panicked, right? But even within the football side, I think there's a certain urgency that now is lit underneath all of these athletes who are not the really, really premier players. Let's say the top 100, top 200 players in the country. Those guys, they're getting all kinds of attention no matter what. But if you're one of those mid-tier guys, you may not be as willing to patiently wait around and slow play the whole process, waiting to see who's going to offer you a scholarship late. You're going to jump on what's available to you, right? Because you want to secure that free education first and foremost, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, with all those things being said, Nebraska has found their way through this pretty well. We're currently ranked number 17 by Rivals on our recruiting ranking, and we're third or fourth in the Big Ten, depending on which service you review. So we're right there in that upper echelon of them. We're nowhere close to Ohio State, which again is going to have a national championship caliber recruiting class, and Michigan is not far behind them. They're also doing extremely well. Penn State is doing very well, and then the next tier, which is considerably farther back, is going to be teams like Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, and that type of tier. And that's where we find ourselves. So we're right there with the Wisconsins and Iowas that we compete against for a West Division championship down the road. So, but we've done really well. We got probably the top tight end in the country to commit to us. We already have one of the top offensive linemen in the country who happened to be from Nebraska, probably the only top 100 player we had in the state of Nebraska. So we have two top 100 players already committed to Nebraska. And that's really good. Anytime you can get one of the top 100, that's a big deal. But we have quite a number of guys that were really high on our coaches list that they were recruiting from the very early era. We tend to only recruit one quarterback a year, and we got that guy in the fold early and has been doing some recruiting for us. And he's an interesting prospect because he's a little different than the other guys we've been going after. He's 6'5", about 200 pounds, and he's again a Nebraska kid, so a little unusual. But he has shown really well in the development side of things, and so his ceiling is very high. he's a hell of an athlete. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs. And we have 3 other really good quarterbacks. So this is a guy that is maybe a little bit more of a project, but has a really big upside. So we'll see what happens with him.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's good.
So I think it's going really well overall. Could it go better? Yes. Could we be in on some of the more high end type players? Is this the kind of class that'll get us to where we're competing with the Ohio States and Michigans and Penn States of the world to win conference championships? Probably not good enough yet. But frankly, we have to get this kind of class first and then translate that into Big Ten championship opportunities through winning the West Division. And then I think you'd see that jump from being a top 20, 25 class into the top 15 range very consistently if we could start getting to the Big Ten championship regularly and playing in bigger bowl games and winning some of them. Right. That's a step you just have to take. You don't just magically snap your fingers and all of a sudden you go to, Big Ten champions when you've got a team that is coached as well and recruits as consistently as Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State do.
Very true. And the final thing I wanted to talk about in terms of the, kind of summertime is that obviously the new rules kind of came into effect in terms of rules for licensing, in terms of student athletes and how they could get paid and things like that. And we've discussed all that stuff in length on previous podcasts that you can go back and listen to if you're interested in that part of the discussion. But the reality of the situation is that those are the new rules, and everybody's going to be competing on that front. So it was cool to see that Nebraska kind of got out in front of the competition in terms of already promoting different methods for athletes to build their brand. And I know there's a company that's by former Nebraska football players that is all about that and making those contracts for athletes and things like that.
Right. There's a company by the name of Open Doors that's out of Lincoln, Nebraska. It was started by a couple of co-founders are both past Nebraska football players, but were both creative in the internet age, right? And understood the value of what they now call NIL, which is name, image, and likeness. And what they've learned is that if you want to generate a lot of revenue as a person who is popular because they're a sports figure or a performer or whatever, then you need to make use of social media tools to make sure that you're maximizing those types of things. And to do that, oftentimes you need some special coaching or assistance, right, from professionals who know how to do it and how to maximize your influence, right, and become the best influencer you can, so that then marketing people who want to market their products are going to want to be attached to you, right? So that's where that name, image, and likeness matters. And this company, Open Doors, has jumped on that and was early to the game. And then, of course, once the rules changed in the NCAA that allowed athletes to now make money on their own image and likeness, well, Nebraska was perfectly poised to take advantage of that. Now, this company has already been doing this for quite some time, has a number of professional leagues as well as professional athletes individually who employ them to do their work. Now, they also are doing it with Nebraska. Oklahoma has signed on. Purdue has signed on. University of Central Florida, UCF signed on. I think the first program to sign on to get this kind of a program going in the country across all the United States was the University of Nebraska with Open Doors. And now UCF was the second, which I'm sure Scott Frost had a little something to do with that, directing them that way and advocating for Open Doors and advocating for UCF to get those guys together. And then since then, Purdue and Oklahoma and some others have jumped on board as well. And everyone's going to be doing it soon. So there'll be a lot of competitors to Open Doors, I'm sure, going forward. But it's just another example of Nebraska being on the cutting edge. Just like they were the first ones to have a strength and conditioning program, they were the first ones to recognize the importance of having staff psychologists that worked with individual teams to build their winning cultures. Nebraska's always been our training table was legendary from the very get-go of such things. So, nutrition, strength and training, psychology, all cutting edge stuff. Education, our student assistance center is phenomenal. So this is just another example of how Nebraska has always committed their student athletes at the highest level.
That's right. That's the
So
Nebraska way.
it is the Nebraska way, and it doesn't always produce the results that we want, because we also have some hills to climb in terms of how we overcome physical limitations that we have, both in numbers. We don't have a lot of great athletes in our backyard because we're a small state with small population, but we overcome it by making all these other things exceptional.
That's right. So on the last podcast, we talked a bit about the schedule that we have, the 8-game schedule that's currently listed for the Big Ten for this year for Nebraska. But
Yes.
we didn't go as in depth into like what all the new rules and regulations are. And so we thought we could talk about that a bit today and how that will, affect the season and the fans out there who are excited to, see the new, the football that we've all been longing for. I know
Right.
one of the rules is that in terms of attendance, it's limited to the families of the athletes. So, not going to be much going on in that stadium, but, I think people have kind of gotten used to that now. Like I watch these like boxing events and there's like nobody there. So you can like really hear like when somebody gets punched, like you really hear the noise of that. So I think it'll be a kind of a similar thing, but it is odd, that when a big play happens or something, exciting happens and you get the commentators reacting. And so that still is there, but there's nothing else.
Right.
So
there's no crowd cheer and all that. That's
yeah,
where I'm hoping that they maybe relent a little bit, and maybe either help broaden the definition of what family is for these individual student athletes. And also, I would love it if they would allow for the band to be there and the cheerleaders to be there if they're socially spaced. And I've seen some of the um, uh, conferences have taken that approach, and I wish that the Big Ten, and I'm hopeful that maybe they'll reconsider that after they get going and they have the first couple of weeks where they're really tight on their process. But if it's going well, then maybe they would open things up a little bit more and allow, like the cheerleaders and the band and stuff to be in part of it. Because I think missing the band noise and the band sound in the stadium is going to be really obvious in its absence, especially when something good happens, right? Because if you're the Oklahoma Sooners and you didn't hear the na 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 that thing, that would drive you nuts if you were an Oklahoma fan and you didn't get to hear those horns, right?
right.
Where for Nebraska to rouse up the fight song every time we have a touchdown, that's a big deal. And now it's not going to be there.
Right.
So how are they going to duplicate that?
Well, and if they wanted to, they could, just have stuff
Right.
pre-recorded and played over the
Sure.
speakers, which I know isn't the same, but it's
I'm
something.
sure I'm sure they will, but that won't sound even close to the same
No.
as real live trumpets playing and stuff, brass. But
Yeah.
yeah. Well, the bigger thing than just the fans, though, is some of the other requirements, and that's the thing is even though we've announced a schedule and I'm excited for us to have a season and all that, the reality is that with these requirements, I think it's going to be very difficult for the Big Ten, which diddle daddled around for way too long to get to this point and make this damn decision. And as a result, they have no bye weeks in their schedule. Their plan is to play starting the 23rd of October and play every single week for 8 weeks straight, and maybe a ninth week for all the teams, and certainly at least two of them, rather than having a bye week somewhere in there. Um, and they could have, if they had gotten their shit together, they could have had two or three. The original plan that was proposed would have been an October 11th start date. It would have just been a couple of weeks after the SEC got started, and we could have still had the 8-game schedule with a ninth option game, and we would have had, basically two bye weeks for every team to use, so that if they had a week where they had to be in quarantine or whatever and wanted to postpone a game, they would have some open weeks to do that. But
Right.
now that we don't. So that, number one, that waiting the way they did has screwed them in terms of giving them any flexibility. They have no flexibility. Number two, They have on the positive side, they've taken the approach with this new antigen test that's become available, that they're planning to have every student athlete tested every day. So they're going to be daily tested, and then if you end up indicating positive on that antigen test, then you take a second test, which is the polymer chain reaction test, the PCR test, to confirm the result of the point of contact test. So there's kind of two levels of testing before they confirm you as positive.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense to do that. Actually, I like that idea.
Yeah, and I
But
saw as well that if you do test positive, then the minimum wait period, assuming you get better and everything's fine, is 21 days.
yeah, which is way more than anybody else is required. Most all the other conferences are only requiring 14 days, and the CDC even admits that you don't need more than 10. So why 21 days? Well, the 21 days is because of the whole cardiac plan. They're all looking at biomarkers, ECGs, echocardiograms, and a cardiac MRI are going to be required of everyone who tests positive. So they're going to do all those tests, very comprehensive cardiac testing, and then they're going to monitor that person's heart basically for 21 days. They're very, very scared of somebody having a heart related issue as a result of COVID. And that's why they went to 21 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the more positive side of things, obviously all these student athletes are at these nice universities. The Big Ten are all pretty prestigious, and so you have great facilities and great doctors and everything kind of at your beck and call when needed. And the data that will be gathered from all these tests can be used by them for research purposes and things like that. So
Right.
I understand where they're coming from in that respect.
Yes, and I do too. It's just that if your goal is to let the kids play safely, then let's not let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. And I feel like to some extent, because the thing with this antigen test is it can do false positives, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's in an effort to make sure that they catch everything, the way that the sensitivities are set up on that, they would be far more preferred to have a false positive than a missed negative, or excuse me, a missed positive,
Right.
right? So they're it's gonna tend to detect positives when they're not really there. Thus, that's why we're doing the two-step process
Right.
with this PCR test being a little bit more extensive, a little bit more of a precise test that's maybe a little more accurate, but is also takes a lot longer to do and is more expensive.
Right. Right. But, you won't ever take the second test unless you test positive for the first. So, that'll be
Correct.
a small number.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Now the thing that is a challenge is the team positivity rate, which is determined as the number of positive tests divided by the total number of tests administered. Then the rates that they're putting for green, orange, and red zones are really quite aggressive. I mean, green is just 0 to 2%, and I think that most every team is going to be in that above 2% range. So I think it'll be very hard for a team of that large to maintain in the green for very long. Orange is 2 to 5%. I'm hopeful that most teams will be able to manage themselves in that range of orange 2 to 5%. And if you're red, then you're done. Then 5% or more, and they're putting you on the sidelines until that rate goes down. Now it is not an individual daily rate, but a rolling average of the 7 days previous days. So it's a rolling average of that percentage. So it gives you some time to respond, I guess, to get you to below 5% by game day, maybe, or something. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. But then there's this other element that's called the population positivity rate. And the problem with that is I think the reason for them putting that in there is to put an expectation on the college communities to really hunker down and lock down on the community's effort to limit COVID, right? As a whole community, because they don't want, again, we talked a little bit about, you got nobody at the games, but what are those people going to do? Well, they might be in tailgate lots. They might be just coming to town and partying at the bars and in the districts of where they would usually go before or after a game, but they're going to be there for the whole game. Well, now what are you doing? You're just changing the concentration from one spot to another. And if the community doesn't limit that or restrict that, then this population positivity rate is going to be the thing that bites them in the ass. And that, it's a little higher. It goes green is 3.5%, orange is up to 7.5%, and anything above 7.5%, and you're in red there. Well, I can tell you right now that I don't understand what these numbers are. Number of positive individuals, I get that. That's easy. Divided by total population at risk. And I don't know what that number is. Is that the number of people who've been tested? Is that the number of the population of the community that you live in? What is that number? Population at
Right.
risk.
Well, I can say it's definitely not tested. I think it's overall population, whether that's the campus or it's the whole city that the campus is
Right.
in. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Well,
but
if
but it is worth noting though within their document it says that if you were orange/red, so basically you're orange on the team side and you're red on the overall population side,
right, you
then
can still proceed
you could still
with caution.
proceed with caution and extra measures. Um,
Right. Right. So yeah, that definitely heavy emphasis on the team positivity rate as the final determining factor. But um, yeah, I worry that population positivity rate though is going to be something of the red flag that causes people, because even in that orange category, it gives them, they call it uh, alter practice and meeting schedules, consider viability of continuing with scheduled competition. So it asks you to consider the viability of still having the game. And so they're gonna put it back in the hands of the bureaucrats who are just CYA and trying to reduce their liability. So the precedent is going to be set, I think, pretty early on, that the first team that has to make that decision when they're in the orange, red, or orange category, uh, if if they choose to play anyway, then great. Then the precedent will be set that that's acceptable. But if they choose not to play, then it's going to be really hard for the next person to choose to play.
mhm.
You follow me? So
Yeah.
I just think that because of all these rules and the 21-day, on the shelf for any athlete who tests positive, I think you're going to see a lot of teams really struggle to be able to field a team that's competitive, and so it'll be easier for them to just decide not to play and postpone. And so we've got 8 scheduled. I think we'll be lucky to get 5 games in.
hmm In
I'm
our
hopeful we can get 5 games in.
in our schedule. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Well, and like you say, we'll kind of have to see how it plays out. It's an experiment, just like everything is in this crazy world we're living
Yep.
in right now.
That's true.
To your point on like the fan side of things, I definitely think that there's ways that you can, because like for example, out here in LA, I went to a drive-in movie theater event for The Mandalorian, the Star Wars TV show, and Disney did a good job with it, where like you drove, and this was way more personalized than you would do for like a big tailgate event, but you drove up in your car and they gave you a little baggie that had like food in it, so you didn't have to go anywhere, and you weren't supposed to leave your car and hang out outside unless you needed to or whatever. But everybody was spaced in their cars, and we all watched the movie, and it was a good time. So I definitely think there's a way you could set up tape on the ground, or lines of like, okay, this is your tailgate space or whatever, here's your car, here's your little tent for your people. You can set up your TV out there, and then you can still yell at your neighbor 2 cars down, your family or whatever, or your friend, and still kind of get some of that communal experience. Everyone's honking their horns when we score a touchdown or whatever, even though it's obviously nowhere near what we would get inside the stadium. But I think people are hungry for something like that.
Right. Right. And I don't know, but like you said, I think creativity is the key word, and I'm hopeful that they can come up with some ways that where they do that, and I'm hoping that they allow commercial activity to be involved, so that these people who rely on, this economic engine that is collegiate football can find ways to make enough revenue for themselves that they're able to keep their doors open, um, for the future years, right? So that's what I'm hopeful.
Yep. Yep. Certainly. Yeah. In terms of the local communities and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
And so, looking at our schedule briefly to wrap things up here, I know we talked about it a bit last time, and I said, on an optimistic side of things, like 5-3 would be great. And if we only play 5 games, then it's like, well, what teams do we not play?
Well, right.
Would influence that.
And that's where the front end of our schedule being so tough, we could easily be, 1-3 and only have played 4 games, and then the season's over,
right.
and we're 1-3.
Right.
But you know what? I don't care what the season record is this year. This season does not matter in terms of win-loss record. What Nebraska fans got to look at is, can we play some football? Can our younger guys get some snaps and experience? And can we move ourselves forward culturally within Scott Frost's program, so that next year, hopefully after a vaccine has been made available and enough people, have chosen to take it or whatever, that people feel more comfortable in being able to go back to some normalcy of life, that we would have a football team with a little bit more maturity and a little bit more seasoned and ready culturally to take on a football schedule and win some football games, and when it matters, when we have a chance to do something with it.
Yeah, I agree. Like I mentioned on the last podcast, I think that just in general, for Nebraska and for all the teams around the nation, there's obviously going to be a huge asterisk by the season for everybody. And so, unless you're like really think you're competing for a national championship, and even then, it's going to be weird. But I don't think people should be freaking out their record too much. I know there was some pushback by Nebraska fans in terms of when this schedule came out, and we saw how front loaded it was, and how tough we have it in those first 4 weeks. There was maybe some fans that were a little upset about that, but just last week we weren't going to be able to play at all. So, let's appreciate what we've got. You use this as a learning opportunity for our younger kids and all that, and try to, take that step towards rebuilding as we progress towards that goal of making it back to that national championship someday.
Exactly. I totally agree. And that's what I want Nebraska fans to view this as, and just enjoy the fact that our guys in our helmets get to go out there and play and compete the way they want to compete, and see where the chips fall. And it doesn't matter if they end up being losses, as long as they played as hard as they could when they were trying to compete.
That's right.
And if they compete, then I'm okay with the outcome.
Here we go. All right. So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can find us online if you search for College Football Throwdown on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a rating and a review there. We always like hearing from the fans. We'll read any of your comments out live on the air. So thank you all for listening, and you can reach us at huskerpete13@gmail.com with any comments or reviews of any sort. So thank you for being with me here today, Dad, to discuss this latest information about the upcoming football season. And I know next week the SEC plays. I'm not sure, we'll see if there's enough kind of news to talk about in terms of doing another podcast. But we'll get back into the groove of doing these, and look forward to that late October date when we can finally watch our Huskers on the field again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be nice because we'll start getting a little bit of feedback, because practice will start going. It'll be a lot like the fall season that usually happens in August, only it's going to be happening in September and October.
Yep, going to be an adjustment for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yep. So until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.